In sickness and in health, that was the vow I made over 35 years ago when I married my husband, Walter. It was the holiest promise in my book, and I kept it, just as the other half did in good times and in bad. I thought I was the perfect wife in appearance, but in reality, I was much more than that. I not only gave my husband the 3 children he wanted, served dinner on time every day in a spotless home, but I also supported him in everything he did. And I don't mean that metaphorically. When we got married, Walter had a good job, so we bought a house together and started a family. But during my 3rd pregnancy, he was laid off and couldn't find anything close to his former salary. So, despite being heavily pregnant and having 2 small children at home, I took on temporary jobs and managed it all. I was very proud of myself for still maintaining a spotless home, with clean, well-fed children and homemade meals every day when Walter came back from job hunting. I was the kind of person who would say that today's women didn't know what it meant to fight like I did, or what it meant to fight for your family and your marriage. Years later, I felt extremely humbled. My 3rd child was about 6 months old when Walter finally found something permanent, so at that time I had to work a lot. The good part was that we lived near his brother and his wife, and they helped me so I could go to work, but we couldn't rely on them too often. It felt wrong I should be home with my children as a wife. Both of us sighed in relief when Walter got a new job and I could stop working and return to my duties as a housewife. Many years after that moment, I thought we were the perfect example of what a marriage should look like. Our children grew up and started their own families, and Walter and I became empty nesters, but we were fine until I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The change was almost immediate at that doctor's appointment. Walter became stiff, and I thought he was afraid of what might happen, but his demeanor remained reserved even when the doctor said it was caught early and was highly treatable. I thought he just needed time. I needed support, but discovering I was sick hit me harder than anything else. Regarding treatment, the doctors wanted to see how I responded to chemotherapy before recommending surgery. A mastectomy sounded so frightening to me that I decided not to tell my children for a while. They didn't live nearby, and I felt that my husband was more than enough support. I felt better keeping it to myself until I recovered. Bad news should always come with some good news, I thought. Walter came to the first appointment and seemed concerned, which was impressive. I thought he had accepted the situation and was ready to stand by my side, but he skipped the next appointment. At the 3rd session, another patient at the clinic told me something strange. I searched online, and many women in forums said the same thing. I couldn't believe it, but my instinct told me it was true. Apparently, husbands are very likely to leave their wives after a cancer diagnosis. I wanted to deny it. Walter would never do something like that. But when he missed further appointments and could barely look at me after I had vomited at home, I knew it. Women just know. It didn't take long before Walter left me with just a small note saying he couldn't do this anymore because he hadn't signed up for it. I guess in good times and in bad, only counted if he was the one who was sick. We had many years of good health, and I had nursed him through colds, fevers, and everything else. I thought about telling the children, but I just couldn't do it. Even when the divorce papers came far too quickly, I started to believe he had wanted to leave me before I was diagnosed. But the divorce was just the tip of the iceberg. Walter wanted everything for himself. I went to my lawyer and found out that our house, which was mostly paid for with my money for the down payment, was in his name only. Everything else also belonged to him. I had a separate account, but barely anything in it. I never knew I had to keep my money separate from my husband. He wouldn't answer my calls, and soon I saw his photos with another woman on Facebook. I didn't like that either. One afternoon I went to his office. I had a reason to be there, since some papers needed his signature. I could have done it through our lawyers, but oh well. I dressed up and looked just as pitiful as I did in front of the judge. The people in his office knew me, so they would definitely react. Like I said, I was the perfect wife, always well-groomed. The looks I got as I entered were terrible, but they served my plan. Everyone probably knew we were divorced, but they likely didn't know I was sick. By then, I was already wearing a headscarf and a face mask because the doctor had added more rounds of chemotherapy before we decided on surgery. That helped the situation. Walter was angry when he saw me, but I only told him that I just wanted to finish this. He signed, and I left, but not before passing by his assistant. She asked how I was doing, and I told her that the divorce and my illness were difficult, that the chemo was worse than I'd ever imagined. I saw her face had confirmed that Walter hadn't said a word. Everyone in the office, maybe the whole building, would soon know what was going on. They wouldn't want to face the consequences. They just wanted as many people as possible to know what kind of person my ex-husband really was. Some time later, I took a big box to my brother-in-law's house. I had some of Walter's things that I decided Mariano should have. He was most surprised by my appearance and asked what was wrong. "Are you sick, Rose?" I pretended to be confused and said, "Yes, Ron, I have cancer. Didn't Walter tell you?" He left me because he couldn't handle it. It was the first time I said it out loud and in so many words, really to anyone. Ron couldn't believe it, and his wife Guadalupe was just as outraged. But I told them I was better off this way and just wanted to bring their things and say goodbye in case I never saw them again. My ex-brother-in-law was upset by my words and said, "We can see you whenever you want. You are family." I thanked him for the gesture but asked him not to tell anyone, because my children didn't know yet, and I wanted to get better before I told them. Guadalupe didn't like that. She said they should be here with me. What if something happened and they couldn't get here fast enough? I told her I was feeling much better and would tell them soon that it would help. Guadalupe offered to help me first. She came with me to my last appointments, listened to me, and comforted me when I cried, because the doctor said the chemo was going well and I might not need surgery. She cooked for me and told me more about my ex. When Walter told them about our divorce, he only said we had grown apart, which I suspected. They hadn't seen much of him since he found a new girlfriend, and Guadalupe didn't want to meet her either. She was disgusted because he had gone out with a much younger woman. I didn't care, but it was nice to know that after all these months alone and sick, I was not alone. I should have known that Guadalupe wouldn't keep it secret for long. That appearance at Walter's work and Guadalupe's friends ensured that everyone knew what kind of person my ex was. She told everyone who would listen. We didn't live in a small town, but we were known in the area, and people talk and judge. It felt like my little revenge, if you will. It was done. I was finally ready to let things rest. I called my children, explained everything, apologized, and asked them to visit me if they could. I never thought I would see Walter before I called them, but it happened after what was supposed to be my last round of chemotherapy for a long time. Even with anti-nausea medication, I was still struggling not to vomit when my ex came into my house. He used the kitchen's sliding door, which I always left open. The first thing he said to me after all that time and everything he had done and taken from me was, "How could you ruin my life, my reputation?" I asked him how I had ruined his life. I was the sick one, and he lived happily with a trophy girlfriend. He said she had left him, which certainly wasn't my fault. Walter asked why I couldn't just keep quiet and pretend to be the good wife I had always been and give him a smooth divorce. He said, "No, you had to act like a martyr and get everyone on your side." I said nothing, but he saw my face and saw that I found it ridiculous. That was the moment I noticed a side of him I never knew existed. After the diagnosis, the infidelity, and the divorce, I realized my husband was a complete coward, absolutely dependent on me for everything. I'd bet my life that it wasn't just his ruined reputation that scared off his trophy girlfriend. He probably treated her like a servant as well. And that's not what young women want from a sugar daddy. I thought a coward was just weak and without character. I never thought violence was in his nature. Walter exploded when he saw how my lips curled at his accusations after he said the worst things a person can say. I saw his hands going right for my throat, and I thought this was how it would end, except Guadalupe, my savior, opened the door and brought everything to a halt. Behind her were my 3 children with their spouses and kids. She brought them to me at the best time. I hadn't talked much about my children before, but I had 2 sons and a daughter. My eldest son, Fernando, saw his father's hands in the air and immediately understood the implications Walter had laid hands on me. So Fernando and his brother grabbed him and threw him out of the house. The women and children came in for safety and to protect me, and I told them I was fine, except that I had to run to the bathroom for a while. I was sure that had more to do with what could have happened than with my treatment. My ex-husband left, and everyone around us cut off contact with him forever. My children reproached me a bit, because I had basically kept a whole year of my life secret from them, but I was sick, so there wasn't much they could do. When the doctor officially told me I was in remission, my daughter Anna demanded that I move in with her, and I did. It was simply better to be closer to them. In these last years, I was happier than ever before since I got married. I no longer judge women or anyone who doesn't want to settle down. Marriage isn't for everyone. Live your life the way you want, and make sure you surround yourself with people you love and trust. It's often hard to know who they will be, but you need them. Telling Mariano and Guadalupe the truth was the best thing I did at that moment, and I will always be grateful that they thawed my children's hearts. It seemed as if she had saved my life. A heavy weight seemed to lift from my shoulders as I finally moved into my new apartment. It was a small refuge where I could be myself, far from all the drama and tension I had experienced in my brother's house. My friends were incredible when they took me in, and I was determined to repay their kindness by being a supportive and positive roommate. I began to settle into my new life. My job at the pizzeria was going well, and I made an effort to be a reliable and dedicated employee. In my free time, I got involved in activities that brought me joy and fulfillment. I started taking dance lessons and rediscovered a passion for music and movement. It was as if I were rediscovering parts of myself that had been suppressed for a long time. Over time, I formed new friendships and built a network outside my family. They helped me realize that I was so much more than the opinions and judgments of other people. I was strong, resilient, and worthy of love and respect, regardless of my weight or appearance. In the meantime, I kept in touch with my brother, but kept Renata at a distance. I no longer wanted to be drawn into her drama and manipulation. He understood and respected my decision, and our relationship improved significantly now that Renata's shadow no longer loomed over us. With each passing month, I felt safer and stronger than ever. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but I now faced the world with my head held high, ready to take on anything that came my way. And so I continued my journey with determination and courage toward a fulfilling and meaningful life, in which I left the suffering of the past behind and embraced the future with hope and optimism. This story is crazy, and you'll probably think I'm stupid for not going to the police, but my reputation was already ruined. Everyone who knew about the situation believed him instead of me, so I had no choice but to move forward. I didn't know if things would become violent. I didn't know what he was capable of, but it was the only option I saw. Sometimes I still can't believe I defeated him. But back to the beginning, I started dating my boyfriend Charlie about a year before the pandemic broke out. Everything was great. He was sweet, attentive, and a great problem solver, the kind of person someone with a chaotic life like mine needed. He kept me on track, but I didn't know what lay beneath the surface. Everything fell apart a few years ago, and everyone was panicking. We decided to move in together to create the bubble they wanted us to have. We also thought it would be a good idea to save money on rent and such. I was lucky that my lease ended in 2 months, and my landlord let me go without a penalty. Some moving companies still worked in our city, and our jobs went fully remote, so it all seemed predestined. We set up our offices well. Charlie did. He was the tech guy, not me. In retrospect, that was a mistake. The guest room was our shared office. If one of us had a meeting, the other would step out to the living room for a while. I won't go into detail about our jobs, but Charlie had far more hours than I did. I often finished work early, earlier than in a normal office day, and then I had more time for myself. I started cooking more, reading more, and even exercising more, believe it or not. My mental health was much better, but I felt Charlie wasn't doing so well. I told him he should take more breaks. His work seemed more demanding than before, and that wasn't fair. They weren't paying him more or anything. I read some tips online about how to separate work and living space even when working from home. We had more money because we weren't going out and were saving on rent, so I bought him a new computer. Again, I'm not technical, so I got some help from the guy at the store to buy the right gaming computer. I told Charlie that when he was done with work, he should go to our room and use this computer only for fun if he still wanted to be online. I was serious. I never thought I'd become that kind of nagging girlfriend, but it seemed to work. Charlie finally realized how things had changed. Before, I would bring him dinner at his desk, and he'd eat without thinking about it. But then we started eating together and really enjoying it. He watched me exercise with YouTube videos, and we laughed a lot more. He also played more on his other computer. Sometimes I spied on him and saw him laughing and having fun. Our intimate life improved significantly, and I started thinking that the crazy events of a few years ago were the best thing that could have happened to us. We were doing much better than some of our friends who had been together longer or were married and went crazy staying at home. But I didn't know that Charlie wasn't only having fun playing on the new computer I'd bought him. He was doing something else, something I should have noticed at the time. I didn't think much of it, but in retrospect, it's all clear. I think that was the beginning. My friend Paula sent me a message one day asking how I was doing. I told her everything was great because it was the truth. I was better than ever. She said, "Good, but how's work?" That confused me. Work was perfect, and I told her that. She didn't ask more about it, but I think she had already found out what I would discover months later. Another warning sign came when Charlie had a gaming session on his Discord or whatever. I don't know how it works. I made sure not to go into the room when he was relaxing with a game, but I needed my charger and went in for just a second. I left when I heard someone say, "She's the hottest. I can't believe you." And that was it. I didn't hear anything else. I was used to compliments, especially from my ex's friends. It wasn't unusual for me, so I knew it was better not to listen closely. It pains me now that I didn't pay attention, though it might not have changed anything. Still, I was more alert now. Paula didn't text me anymore after asking about my work, which at the time wasn't unusual because everyone was busy or dealing with other things. But 2 months passed. Charlie and I were the perfect couple. I felt like we never left the house unless it was absolutely necessary, and we also didn't order much food, but I missed my friends overall. I messaged Paula, asking how she was doing, how work was going, and how her family was coping with the pandemic. Her answer was strange. "I'm sorry, Lara, but I just don't want to be friends with someone who does that kind of thing. You know, you could have talked to me if you needed money. Everyone is fine, but I guess this is the end of our friendship." I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked who told her I needed money. I was doing great at work. I would probably be promoted soon because the pandemic didn't affect our business at all. I told her I would probably earn more than ever before. Julia didn't block me after that strange message, so I texted her, "If you're still working, why are you posting all those things online?" I asked which things online, and she called me. Julia was hesitant to ask more questions, and then said, "Honey, you opened an OnlyFans account. Everyone thinks you're doing it because you lost your job." Then she told me that OnlyFans wasn't the only thing, that there were videos of me on public adult websites. I laughed on the phone and told her it was the strangest joke anyone had ever made, but she said it was true and started sending me things. At first, it was odd because some pictures were obviously not meat was good Photoshop, I guess, but it wasn't me. I told Julia that, but then she showed me other videos, some sort of surveillance of me exercising in the living room. At that moment, I was shocked. Of course, I knew we had cameras, but how did they end up on the internet? There was another video of me cooking in my kitchen, but it was focused entirely on my backside. When Julia showed me what she had, she asked, "Lara, you're not the one posting these things, right?" I definitely wasn't. At that moment, I cried and could barely breathe. There were photos with my face, underwear, and bikinis I had never worn in my life, let alone taken pictures in. Some looked so real. I asked Julia who else knew about it, and she said everyone but me. I freaked out. I'm not proud of it, but I stormed into our room, screaming at him, hitting him, and almost going after his computer. He held me back. His idiot Discord friends probably heard the whole fight, but I didn't care. They probably saw this stuff too. Charlie yelled in my ear, "What are you doing? Why are you acting like this?" I broke free from his grip, even angrier. I couldn't believe he asked me that. The audacity! But I think that was part of his personality somehow. I told him I knew everything and that I wanted him to delete it all right now. I kept screaming, and through the adrenaline surge, I felt I had to leave immediately. I grabbed a bag and started packing, and that's when Charlie changed. In retrospect, I misread it. I thought he was in serious trouble because he grabbed my face and looked me straight in the eye, saying that under no circumstances would I leave. I said he was crazy if he thought I'd stay with someone who did that to me, but he laughed. I thought he would hit me, scratch me, bite me, fight me. I was ready for the fight of my life. Instead, he started laughing again, not angry or confused, not even pretending to be confused. He was calm when he said, "You're not leaving. You won't leave me, and you'll never leave me. You belong to me again." I was ready for anger, for threats of physical violence, but they didn't come. I grew bolder and said, "Yes, I'm leaving, and I'll tell everyone the truth." Then came the real threats. "If you leave, I'll upload more. I have much more than what I've already uploaded. I mean, if my tapes are already on OnlyFans, what else could I do?" He said he would do more and worse. He would use more Photoshop and other things to make it look even worse. I didn't fully understand, but some of the images Julia sent me were already very intense. I just wanted out. I threw my bag on the floor and asked, "Why did you do this? I was the perfect person for you, and I felt I did everything to make you happy. I took on traditional gender roles and did everything around the house, and I was happy to do it. We were happy." He didn't laugh at that. He took a deep breath for a moment, and then said his salary had been cut at work, a big pay cut. They didn't fire him, but apparently I earned more than him, and he hated that. He wanted to earn extra money. I asked why the hell he hadn't opened his own OnlyFans. At that time, I didn't know much about that site, but I remembered reading an article about its growing popularity, and as far as I knew, both men and women used it and some people made a lot of money. I might even have been his model if he'd asked. So why did he humiliate me in front of our circle of friends for money? He said he didn't think my parents and most of my family would find out. I don't know what overcame me, but almost against my will, I asked if my content made good money. He smiled and said yes. It made more than enough to cover his pay cut. He asked if I wanted to see, and in that moment, I felt numb. I watched as he showed me everything. There was much more than Julia had sent me, but most of it was doctored. What was real were pictures of my butt, my breasts, and my feet disgusting. There were even some adult videos of him and me, but Charlie explained something about them being extremely exclusive and very expensive. Not all subscribers had access to the worst things, only a few who bought them. I'm sorry, I didn't understand much and didn't ask further. Sorry, I don't know where my head was at that moment. I felt overwhelmed by everything I saw and heard. I didn't know how to react, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let Charlie keep exploiting me like this. I couldn't let him keep threatening to post more of me online. I made a decision at that moment. I decided to be brave and face the situation. I told Charlie I couldn't continue living like this, that I couldn't be part of his plan to make money at the cost of my dignity and privacy. I demanded he delete all the pictures and videos he had posted of me online, and told him I was ready to take legal action if he refused. Charlie was serious for a moment, then started laughing again. He said he couldn't be forced to do anything and that he had even more incriminating material to use if I tried anything against him. I felt desperate. I didn't know what to do. I knew that if Charlie didn't delete this content, my life would be hell. I could imagine the judgment and shame I'd face if my friends, family, and colleagues found out what happened. So I decided not to wait any longer. I ran out of the house and called the police. I explained the situation, showed them the evidence I had, told them about Charlie's blackmail, and begged them to help me stop him. The police acted quickly. They searched our home and seized all of Charlie's computers and electronic devices. They arrested him for extortion and the illegal distribution of intimate materials. It was a long and difficult process, but I finally managed to get all pictures and videos of me removed from the internet. I also went to therapy to help me deal with the emotional trauma I had experienced. Even though it was a terrible experience, it taught me a lot about the importance of standing up for myself and protecting my own dignity. I learned not to let someone manipulate or use me in that way. After all that, I decided to start a new path in life. I moved to another city and started over. I focused on myself, my mental health, and building healthy relationships based on mutual respect and trust. Although I will never forget what happened, I am determined not to let it define me. I'm stronger than I ever thought possible, and I'm determined to move forward and live my life to the fullest. After a year at university, I decided that world wasn't for me. I didn't know what I wanted or where I was going, But I knew those courses that other people seemed so eager to learn in just weren't my place. So I dropped out. My parents hated that. I had to move out of the dorms, but they didn't want me back home, so my brother David offered his basement apartment. He and my sister-in-law Lisa had used it as an Airbnb for a while, but he got tired of that service. He agreed to let me stay for a third of the rental value, which I would pay as soon as I found a job. I was very grateful, but I didn't know that my sister-in-law wasn't entirely happy about it. Lisa was a bit different, and let me explain. Well, I'm pretty overweight, there's no other way to say it. I've tried a million diets and just can't do it. Many people in my family are overweight, so I know that's a factor, but I also simply love food. I can't deny it. I don't know how people can just eat to sustain themselves when good food can be so incredible. Don't misunderstand me, I actually do quite a bit of exercise. I follow Zumba videos online and dance as often as I can. It's just that I probably eat too much, and yes, snacks are my weakness. Lisa is the exact opposite. She's basically a 2000s era model. I can't say much because I know I'm not healthy, but I know she barely eats enough to survive. I've always felt bad for my future nieces and nephews because I'm sure she would be the kind of mother obsessed with diets. Now, that wouldn't be my problem anymore. Fat and thin people exist together in the world and seem fine. Everyone does their own thing. Or, well, not really. Lisa hated me from the moment we met. She was polite, but you know when someone just isn't into you. Several slips in her behavior showed me that, like at my brother's wedding, when she wanted family photos and placed me at the edge. She posted these photos on social media cropped, so I wouldn't be in them, and some were framed in their house without me. On their first Thanksgiving as husband and wife, I saw her lip curl every time I scooped more sweet potato puree onto my plate. She just ate a bit of turkey without gravy and a few asparagus spears, very sad. But who was I to judge her habits? The truth is, everything with her was subtle. She didn't have to see me much, and I didn't have to see her much until I moved into her basement. I had the feeling it wasn't just my weight that bothered her. She probably hated that my family was close-knit and full of love despite our appearance. My parents aren't as large as I am, but they're not thin like a model either. They're basically average. But my father showers my mother with love, calls her beautiful whenever he can, and buys her gifts. That's something I will never have, and I don't know if David feels the same for Lisa. But more importantly for this story is that I'm nice to everyone. I don't want to brag, but I'm funny and kind and help wherever I'm needed. My parents weren't very happy with me because of the university problem, but I know they love me unconditionally, and David is my best friend in the world. My older brother was always my protector and confidant. I think Lisa hated that from the start, but I never had confirmation until I moved into her basement. I didn't know I had almost ruined my life. I moved in quickly. I didn't have much in the dorms anyway, and my brother and his wife helped, but I saw Lisa's expression as we brought my boxes in. David went upstairs to check something, and I started putting my clothes in a closet. Lisa stayed where she was. I told her I could handle everything else and thanked her for her help, but she stayed put. I asked if she needed something, and she asked how long I would stay there. I didn't know exactly, but I had already applied online for jobs at a pizzeria, a cafe, and a rather upscale restaurant. I thought, well, I love food, so maybe I could make a career out of it. I said all this with a smile, thinking she was interested, but she just crossed her arms. "We can't stay here forever, right?" she barked, and I told her I knew that. I had the feeling she wanted to say more, but David came back down and she fell silent. It was fine. I knew I needed to save money, figure out what I wanted, clear things up with my parents, and move out quickly. It just wasn't fast enough. That evening at dinner, Lisa picked at her food quietly. That was normal. Meanwhile, I enjoyed the meal me brother could cook well. We were both taught by our grandmother, another reason I thought a career in the food industry might work for me. After she put more food on my plate, Lisa spoke. "How can you eat so much?" she asked, her voice barely hiding disgust. David frowned, and I'm 100% sure I'd never heard her say something like that before. "I'm overweight. I can eat a lot," I answered, laughing, which made David laugh too. Lisa didn't find it funny. She said it wasn't funny to be obese, that all people should think about their eating choices and how they affect them later in life. She added that when she was a girl, she learned to be strict and disciplined with eating. Otherwise, she'd have problems later, because her mother told her people would judge her for her appearance, and it was better to avoid that by always looking good. I rolled my eyes internally, and maybe I shouldn't have said what I said next, but I couldn't help it. It's okay to be fat. Everyone who matters to me loves me as I am, and everyone else really doesn't care, you know, I added. David was on my side, and we changed the subject to some childhood memories. Lisa remained silent for the rest of our meal. In the following days, Lisa was mostly quiet around me. I stayed in the basement and only came up for dinner because David insisted. She never commented on my food again, but I noticed a lock on some of the kitchen cabinets. That was strange. I had my own kitchen and my own food downstairs, and Lisa wasn't interested in food, so I had no idea what it was about. Things seemed to escalate. One day, my car keys disappeared. I had to go upstairs to ask if she'd seen them. Lisa said no, which made sense since the basement had its own entrance. I asked her to help me look for them, and she said no. She was busy with a magazine. That was understandable, it wasn't her problem. But then I asked if I could borrow her car for a job interview, and she said no and added that I should just walk because I needed the exercise. I left. I had no time for this nonsense and ended up taking the bus to my interview. I had called David to ask if he'd seen my keys, but he said no. I later had to pick up my spare set at my parents' house, where I had left them when they bought me the car. It seemed safer there, though maybe not a good idea now. That's what I did. I got a chance to talk to my mother, apologized for some things, and asked her to be patient with me while I found my path. She understood, I believe. I came home, and David called me for dinner. He smiled and gave me my keys. Apparently, he found them in the flower garden in the backyard. That made no sense. I never spent time in their backyard, especially near the flowers because I'm somewhat sensitive to pollen. He told me to just let it go, and I did. In the next few days, I started to worry. I had a few more interviews, and even though these places seemed busy, none hired me. I applied for various positions: delivery, cleaning, cashier, basically anything. When the manager of a small, standalone pizzeria called to turn me down, I broke down and cried there, asking why they didn't hire me. I just couldn't understand. He said someone had called him to warn about me, claiming I tended to steal food from every place I worked. I told him it wasn't true. I begged for the job, and he seemed to pity me, or maybe no one else had applied. Either way, that call changed his mind and they finally hired me. I had to sit down after I hung up. I couldn't believe it. I had only had a summer job at an ice cream shop before, never stole a single plastic spoon. The only person I could think of who might want to mess with me was my sister-in-law. She happened to know all the places I applied to because I told David at dinner every night. But unfortunately, I felt paranoid. I had no proof and didn't want more trouble, so I kept my head down. I started working, took all the shifts I could, and fended for myself. I barely saw Lucas or Lisa for about 2 weeks, and I hoped that would be enough. But my day off proved otherwise. The only downside to David's basement apartment was that it had no washing machine. His house had a laundry room upstairs that I had used since I moved in, but since the job interview incident, I'd avoided going up there. I couldn't put it off any longer. I quietly went upstairs and started a load, staying there and keeping quiet, trying to avoid Lisa. But I don't know if something bothered her or what, because she came in and screamed in my face that I had to leave her house immediately, that she couldn't stand me anymore, that she wanted me out of her life. She said if it were up to her, Lucas would never have to see my fat ass again. I just stood there shocked. I still didn't want trouble, so I nodded and said I'd leave as soon as I got my first paycheck. My parents would help me since they were no longer that angry. But that wasn't enough for her. She kept screaming that I should leave, and suddenly she lunged at me, grabbing my hair. I had to set a boundary then. I pushed her away. I must not have measured my strength, because she flew back and hit the wall pretty hard. She started screaming that I had attacked her and said she would call the police. I followed, telling her she attacked me first, but she had already dialed. Then Lucas came in, thankfully, and had to witness this crazy scenario. I stood beside him, not knowing what to do. I quickly explained everything before Lisa finished her call. She hung up and told him not to believe me, that I had attacked her without reason. I called my parents. I knew I had to leave, no matter what happened next. The police actually came a few minutes later, and so did my parents. My father went straight to the officers. I had never been in trouble in my life and was afraid. I cried while Lisa lied about what had happened in the laundry room. I knew Lucas wanted to defend me, but he hadn't been there and didn't really know what to do. After hearing both sides, the officers weren't sure what to think, but my father convinced them to let us handle it ourselves, and they seemed to agree. Lisa demanded a restraining order at that moment, but the officers just ignored her, and I'm so grateful my father was there. I whispered to my mother like a little girl that I wanted to go home with them. She helped me pack my things. I don't know what Lucas thought, but he quietly brought my boxes to my car, and I just drove off without another word. I cried on my mother's shoulder that night because I couldn't understand how someone could make false accusations so easily. I told her David's wife was a threat and that I never wanted to see her again. I know I put my parents in a tough position, but I was done with Lisa. If I had to remove Lucas from my life to avoid her, so be it. But after a few days, I realized that was exactly what my sister-in-law wanted. I wouldn't have been surprised if she'd planned it for a while waiting until I came upstairs when Lucas wasn't home. I wouldn't let her get away with this, I thought. I called my brother, apologized for everything, and we had an honest talk. He asked if I wanted to come back, but I didn't. I just said I didn't want to lose him no matter what my relationship with Lisa was like. He seemed relieved and very emotional after all this. After that, I decided to take my revenge note a grand or cinematic revenge, just a persistent presence in my brother's life. I went to his house for dinner every evening. Sometimes my parents came too. I was loud, talkative, more lively than ever before. I ate even more, praised my brother's cooking, invited him out on weekends, telling him to bring Lisa, of course. She seemed to distance herself more every day, not like a beautiful flower that gracefully fades with time, but like a rat eating poison and rotting from the inside. Meanwhile, my job was going well and I saved money. I had enough for a small studio apartment, but I hadn't moved out yet. They were a good excuse to invite Lucas to more things, and I needed to ensure Lisa would explode publicly somehow, and she did, but it didn't take long. For Dad's 55th birthday, Mom organized a barbecue with our closest relatives and friends. Once again, I was the center of attention at the party. I was in every photo, gave a small speech, talked to everyone, and tried to draw more attention to myself, including from Lucas. I just knew Lisa was furious and waiting to pounce. Don't get me wrong, I was tired of this whole act too. I'm sociable, but not that much. I wanted to move on, but deep down, I needed others to see what kind of person she really was. When the party ended, I decided to clean up a few things and take them to the kitchen. It was like the laundry room scene all over again. Lisa came in behind me, not screaming at first. Her eyes were scary as she told me that she knew what I was up to and how I'd gotten away with my previous aggression. She was tired of me and how much attention I got from Lucas. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It seemed hilarious to me. I knew that people who are willing to make false accusations just want others to be as bad as they are. I couldn't believe how crazy she was. She kept accusing me of dumb, small things that made no sense and couldn't possibly bother me or Lucas. It seemed she had planned it all out, but I didn't care. I had no intention of losing this time. I told her I had no problem spending less time with my brother if that's what she really wanted. She stopped talking. I took what I needed and left. I didn't wait for her reaction. I went straight to Lucas, who was hiding in a quiet corner with a whiskey. I told him I was tired of acting perfect just to provoke his crazy wife. I told him he had to choose who was more important to him, and I would accept his decision. He looked at me like I'd fallen on my head, then nodded and said he had decided Lisa must disappear from his life. We agreed to pack the next day and came to my new apartment. I couldn't believe how easy it was to change an entire life just because someone was so angry and crazy. I had nothing against Lucas. I was even ready to forgive him for not having any proof of my story, but I couldn't live with him if Lisa lived there too. We didn't have much time to pack before calls and messages came in, and I had no idea what she wanted, but I was so tired of it all. I just wanted my own life without trying to provoke anyone. I was tired of having to move, and I hope I can stay at this new place for a while without too much drama. There's so much more I need to focus on, and hopefully she got what she wanted after all she did. I met Max at the university before I dropped out. I was in my second year, and Max was in his last year. We shared most of our courses, so he was mainly in the same classes as me. But at first, I paid no attention to him. I was one of those shy girls who focused only on their own existence, not interested in anyone or anything. I was just a spectator in other people's relationships, and had never been in one myself. That day, I was alone in the classroom, eating my lunch, when I noticed a guy sleeping in the back seat. I knew who he was. He was the most popular guy at the university, Max. He was popular because he was clumsy and handsome. But despite his popularity, I didn't find him interesting at first. He rubbed his eyes with his hand while sleeping, his messy hair tickling his eyes. So I went over to him and brushed his hair out of his face. That was the moment I realized how handsome he really was. He truly was as good-looking as people said, I thought, staring at him. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, startling me, and I returned to my seat immediately. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but the bell rang and students started coming in. The next day, I saw him in class, sitting in the seat next to mine. I slowly went there and sat down, took out my notebook, and focused on the lecture. I could feel he was looking at me, but he said nothing, so I completely ignored him and kept looking at my notebook. Suddenly, I turned my head briefly and caught him looking at me. I thought I needed to be careful. There was no way he'd ask me out. "I know you don't go out with anyone, so there's no reason to deny it," he said. "Besides, I caught you looking at me yesterday." My whole body turned red when he said that. I said nothing and kept looking into my book with an empty mind. In the following days, he started following me everywhere, asking if I would say yes. It wasn't that I didn't want to go out with him, but he had a reputation as a serial heartbreaker. I kept turning him down, but he was so persistent that he just wouldn't stop. "What is it about me that you won't even consider going out with me?" he asked. I went into the library, and as always, he followed me. When he asked that, I stopped and turned to him. "What do you think gave you that reputation as a serial heartbreaker?" I looked him directly in the eyes, and he burst out laughing. "You know it's my friends who spread those rumors about me, right? Don't you think it's true?" I felt a bit guilty for believing it. It was also true I had never seen him actually going out with anyone, or maybe I never noticed because I wasn't interested before. "Just say yes. Trust me, you won't regret it," he said, looking at me with puppy dog eyes which made me smile. So I agreed. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, then went back to class. I couldn't believe I was in my first relationship. I began noticing every one of his movements without realizing this smile, his clothes, his scent, whatever perfume he wore, if it wasn't his natural smell. I could notice everything. He permanently changed his seat and started sitting next to me. One day, I overheard some girls talking about how handsome Max was, and that same day I saw Max having a cheerful conversation with one of these girls. I got so jealous I couldn't control my anger when he came to me. I asked him what that was about, pointing at the girl. "Why is my sweetheart jealous?" he asked playfully in response, which made me angrier. "It's nothing, that's Agatha, just a friend," he said, noticing my anger and explaining. But that didn't calm my anger. The next day, Agatha didn't come to class. I didn't care. I was glad Max couldn't talk to her anymore. After that, she never showed up again, and people assumed she had dropped out. Almost 5 months passed, and eventually it was time for Max to graduate and leave the university. That made me very sad, so I decided to leave the university as well to stay with him. But when I asked him about it, he got angry and told me I should focus on finishing my degree. Despite his refusal, I insisted and finally dropped out. Max didn't like that. "I think we should break up," he said when he called me. When I got there, that was the first thing he said. "Why? What's wrong?" I was nervous and couldn't understand why he would say something like that. "I never knew that when I asked you out, you would leave the university and risk your own career. I really like you, Cecilia, but I don't want to be the reason for your happiness." I still couldn't understand what it was about, why he was asking me to leave him. I hadn't done anything wrong. I loved him, and he was the one who kept asking me out repeatedly, and now he was doing this. "I did it to be with you. I can go back to university later." "Don't do this, Max," I pleaded, but he said nothing more than that we would talk later and walked away. I wanted to ask him to move in with me, but I couldn't. It was our first fight, and I wanted to settle things as soon as possible. The next day, I got ready and wanted to surprise him by going to his apartment. But just before I got there, I saw Max talking to another girl near his apartment building. He had flowers in his hand, which I crushed when I saw him. As the girl left, I walked straight toward him. "Who was that? Is that the reason you wanted me to leave?" He seemed upset by my questions. "Come on, Cecilia. Don't make a scene. She's just my neighbor, and you know why I wanted the breakup," he said and walked away after those words. All this only fueled my anger. A day later, Max called me. I was so happy, but my happiness vanished as soon as I answered. "Did you do something to Valentina? She's been missing since yesterday." So he was calling me because of that. "I don't know anything, Max. Why would I harm her?" I hung up after saying that. I guess our fight would drag on for a while before we reconciled. A week or two later, I saw Max kissing another woman in his parking lot when I went there to apologize for taking so long every time. Why does he have to do this to me? I thought. I felt extreme anger and throbbing pain in my chest. But this time, I decided to confront the girl first, not Max. When she left, I stopped her on the way, asking why she kissed my boyfriend. What she told me surprised me, that Max had started going out with her. I showed her pictures of Max and me together, which upset her too, I suppose. She wanted to confront him, but I asked her not to. You know what, forget this cheater. He's done this to me so many times that I can't even stand his disgusting, cheap face anymore. Let's go to my place and have a little drinking party, I said. She initially refused, but I'm pretty convincing, so I managed to get her to come along. Wow, I never knew your place was in such a remote area, she laughed as we arrived. I'm pretty rich. I bought this place for me and Max. But I guess he'll never see it, I said as I unlocked the door. Once we were inside, she got nervous. Why is it so dark in here? It looks like... She couldn't finish her sentence. I hit her on the head. Did she really think she could get away with kissing my man? I dragged her into the secret room in the basement and tied her to one of the posts. I sat there, waiting for her to wake up. After a while, when she woke and looked around, I saw the horror on her face. Oh, and the one tied to your right is Agatha, who tried to seduce Max while at university. That's what I did to her. And the one tied to the post on the left is Teeny. She's been here for almost a week now. Oh, don't worry. They're alive barely, but alive. I laughed and walked toward her. Please, let me go. I swear I'll break up with him and never contact him again. Just forgive me, please, she stammered as soon as I removed the tape from her mouth. It was nothing I hadn't heard from the other two. I simply took out the scissors and started cutting her mouth, the mouth she used to kiss Max. The place was soundproof, so her screams wouldn't escape. After I was finished with her, I sent Max a message. Let's meet. I think it's finally time for us to break up properly. I was sick of his bullshit. I guess the first love really does hurt. My name is Lena, and I've always been an ordinary girl with dreams and hopes like anyone else. I never thought my life would take a dark turn when I met Alejandro. It all began like a modern fairy tale, full of laughter, romantic dates, and promises of eternal love. But behind his seemingly irresistible charm lurked a monster waiting to be unleashed. I still remember when I first saw him in a cozy cafe downtown. He sat in a corner with a charming smile and a piercing gaze, as if he could read my soul. We met by chance, exchanged numbers, and from then on, our lives spiraled downward. At first, everything was wonderful. We went out to eat, strolled through the park, shared our deepest dreams and darkest secrets, but gradually, the signs of his true nature began to appear. Small, sarcastic comments turned into hurtful criticisms. His occasional bouts of jealousy turned into uncontrollable outbursts of rage. I, blinded by love and hoping things would improve, forgave him time and time again. It was on a cold winter evening when everything changed. After a heated argument, Alejandro lost control and hit me for the first time. The dull sound of his hand striking my cheek echoed in my head like a terrifying refrain. I was paralyzed by shock and disbelief. How could the man I loved do this to me? I tried to justify his actions, telling myself it was an isolated incident, that I would help him overcome it. But the reality was that he had unleashed something dark and dangerous within himself, something I could no longer ignore. With each passing day, the abuse grew more frequent and more brutal. Each time he swore it would be the last, but there was always an excuse, always a reason why I deserved the punishment he inflicted. I felt trapped in an endless cycle of fear and despair, unable to find a way out. Eventually, I mustered enough courage to break the cycle. One day, I packed my few belongings, left everything I knew and loved behind, and fled into the darkness of the night. I had no plan. I only knew I had to get away from him, from the invisible prison he had built around me. I hid in a small village in the mountains, trying to rebuild my shattered life. I changed my name, my appearance, my identity. But no matter where I went, I always felt his shadow lurking around every corner, in every shadow, in every whisper of the wind. I thought I was safe, that I could finally start anew, but I was wrong. Even from prison, Alejandro found a way to follow me, to torment me from a distance, threatening, disturbing phone calls, even showing up suddenly in places he should never have been able to find me. Every time I thought I had escaped, he returned with renewed ferocity, fueled by his twisted obsession. His presence became a constant nightmare, a dark shadow I couldn't shake even in my deepest dreams. But I am not a defenseless victim. I refused to let fear and despair consume me. I realized the only way to stop him was to confront him directly, to expose him for the monster he truly was. I gathered evidence, witnesses, anything I could use to bring him to trial. The day of his sentencing was the day of my liberation. When I saw him marched out of prison, shackled and defeated, I felt a relief I had never before experienced. Finally, I could breathe easily, knowing I was safe at least for now. But the story doesn't end here. I know he will never leave me in peace. I know his obsession will only grow stronger over time, fueled by his hatred and thirst for revenge. But I am ready to face him, ready to fight until the end, ready to protect what is mine. Because despite everything, I am still Lena, and I am stronger than he could ever imagine.